Hey everybody, it's time to take another trip around the world. This is my 29-gallon miscellaneous, and everybody in there thinks they're getting something to eat. You can see them all hovering around the surface there. So this tank is due for a water change. I don't really have anything to say about this tank. Haven't really done much of anything to it. I did add some more eggshells to it about a week ago. You can still see a few little white crumbles on top of the leaves, and I literally sprinkled it in from the surface. I didn't even bother putting it down in the water really. So you can still see a few of them on the bottom. They're working their way down into the gravel. And by working their way down in, I don't mean dissolving into it. I mean they're just little tiny bits and pieces, and they just work their way down between the pieces of gravel to where you can't see them anymore. And so they're in the tank. They're just out of sight. And I'm honestly not worried about those little white flakes that are still on those leaves. They'll get knocked out of there next time I do a water change, which will be pretty much any day now. It's really overdue for one. So today I've been in here doing other stuff. Working on my project, like I said, and I've sort of taken a break from doing the kind of nuts and boltsy part of it, the measuring and the drilling and all that stuff. I'm not too fond of all that. I'm not very good at that kind of stuff. So after this video, I'll get to do the fun stuff, which is the creativity and imagination and all that. So we're going to take a little trip around the world. We're not going to talk about that just yet, but that is a little teaser for you. That project is coming along. So here is my 55-gallon gourami tank, also in need of a water change, and it really needs a haircut. I gotta really get in there and remove a lot of that floating water sprite on the left. Don't forget, I do sell the water sprite and Java fern. I've got a bunch of it right now. You can check my email below, contact me if you're interested. Otherwise, I've also got to get in there and trim out a lot of that red tiger lotus. It's getting a little out of control again. You can see some of these runners are looking for the surface. The current from my spray bar is pushing it away from the surface, so it hasn't actually made it there yet. So we'll see. I have to get in there. I don't know how much I'm going to trim it. You can see my little chocolate gourami in there. Never did find that other one, so it's, obviously gone. It's been well over a week now. If you weren't familiar, I got two of these little chocolate gouramis, and after several days, one of them just sort of stopped seeing it. And I looked and looked and looked and waited and waited and waited, and as I said, after a few days, I just decided it's gone. It was never that reclusive to begin with. Why it would have become that reclusive, I don't know. So I have to assume that either it died and rotted away or was devoured, or possibly the striped Raphael got it in the middle of the night or something. I don't know. Anyway, we're down to the one chocolate gourami. I got to get in here and do a water change. Got to trim all of the plants. Other than that, not a lot going on in here that I can think of. So we will move on. Definitely going to be a little more tight for space here. My 55-gallon TBar Tang. Haven't really done much of anything in here. We've got my rubber lip pleco up on the glass over there. Don't get to see this one out very often. The other one, the high fin spotted pleco, that one's out fairly frequently. That one's getting a little more bold now that it's getting bigger. I do need to get in here. I got to do water changes on every tank in here. So, when we get to each tank, just assume it needs a water change when we get there. I'm also probably going to be trimming back some of the Anubias in this tank. It's getting a little lush and bushy again. If you look at this one over here, all this new growth coming up off the end of this rhizome is getting a little bit much in there for me. And then even this Java fern's getting a little bit bushy when you get down below it. It's pretty dense. It really restricts the light. It really restricts the water flow in the bottom of the tank. And, it just becomes problematic. I like a nice lush green tank, but there are limits. You got to keep it under control so that it's not, hindering the way the tank is supposed to operate. If you can get in there. Oh, I didn't even notice that's the high fin spotted pleco right there on the glass. It was there the whole time and I didn't even see it. But if you look at all the roots right behind it, you can see how well that Anubias is doing. And that's all underneath this new LED that I put in there, this shop light. I was hoping it was going to do well for the plants. I always kind of assumed it would, and it sure has, so I'm really happy with that. We're going to move on to my Black Ghost Knifefish tank. This is a 40 breeder. And I'm in the middle. Hopefully the room is not going to stay this cramped in the middle of it once I get some of this stuff sorted out. As I said, I'm kind of taking a break from doing other stuff, so I'm kind of having to twist myself around here to get this whole tank on video right now. So this is my 40-gallon breeder Black Ghost Knifefish tank. Although it's in there, trust me, we just never see it. It really is in there. I do have one. The lights in this tank need to be revamped as well. One of my fixtures burned out, so right now I'm just operating on the one Coralife fixture. It has two high output T5 fluorescents in it, and eventually I'm going to switch this one over to LEDs. I figured out a way to make really, really inexpensive LED panels, if you will, out of foam board or a piece of plastic sheeting or really anything. It's using little like sticky tape, LED tape, and you just basically stick them out, you connect them together, you plug them into an appropriate power source. You got to make sure you get all the right stuff for it. We will be doing a video about that. I'll show you how I built it here in the very near future, so look forward to that. But slap it all together and I can light up a 40-gallon tank like this for about $20. And, I can barely replace the fluorescent tubes that are on here for $20. Now, I'll grant you get what you pay for, and it's not the prettiest of light, as we'll see when we get around to my Gudgeon tank, because I just did it to that tank. So other than that, nothing really going on in here. I did put some snails in this tank. I actually forgot I had done that, and I have not even looked to see if there are any snails in there. So if you saw anything in the video that you were, paying attention to and noticed that I didn't, then I keep saying snail, shrimp. I put 3 ghost shrimp in here. So I don't know if they are still in here or not. So if you saw anything that looked like a shrimp and were wondering about it, then it was probably a shrimp. Not snails. I do have the blue mystery snails though that I got from one of my viewers. I traded for some plants. So again, check out my email below if you're interested in plants. I've always got plants available. So moving on, we're gonna have to take this tank in pieces. I can't stand directly in front of it. This is my 125-gallon native tank. I feel like I did something to this tank this week, but I'm really not sure what it was. I know I've shot some video of this tank this week, but I don't remember whether I added any fish or not. I feel like I did, but I don't know. I can't think for the life of me what it would have been if I did it. Oh well. If I think of it, I'll say. So, not a lot going on in this tank other than me possibly having put a crayfish or two or something in there. Again, if I did put something in here, it would have been so insignificant that I'm really just scratching my head as to wondering why I keep thinking I put something in here. So, nothing really going on in this tank. Let me get around all this stuff and we'll try to look at it from this end. Like I said, we're going to have to kind of piecemeal this tank. I redid the lighting, as you probably remember, a little while ago. I put these 2 LEDs on this end, and you can see the difference between the way the one shines through the plants. When I first walked in and saw that one day, I really did think that something had gone wrong with one of the lights, and it was like dimming out or something in the weird yellow lighting. So ultimately, that doesn't look too bad. It looks a little unnatural. Again, I'm not overly happy with it, but I'm not terribly unhappy with it either. Here is the high fin spotted pleco that's in this tank, and one of these days I'm going to have to get some pictures of both of them and put them side by side. I'm beginning to wonder if they're not different fish. The one in my 55-gallon TBar tank seems to be growing much more slowly than the one in this tank. Now, I know it's different circumstances, even different tank temperatures will make a difference on a fish's metabolism. And then, of course, the food source of the wood is, much more abundant in this tank than it is that tank. But still, very, very different growth rate, and they're beginning to look a little different, and I don't know if one's like starting to show mature coloration and the other one's not. I don't know if it's my imagination. I've never really, I got to look at one in one tank and then walk over to the other tank and look at it and then try to remember, is it exactly the same? Is that a normal So I'll get some pictures one of these days, and we'll try to get a more direct side-by-side comparison and see if they're not different fish. So other than that, can't think of anything else going on in this tank, so we're going to move on. My snail tank is still my snail tank. It's just got snails in it for feeding my puffer fish, and occasionally I throw it in my tanks. It's got some loaches in it. I still think I've got a shrimp in this tank. I've looked and looked, and I can't see it anywhere, but I did put some of the shrimp in this tank until I remembered that's not a good idea. The shrimp eat the snail eggs, and I've never been able to breed snails and shrimp in the same tank. So I got them all out. That's why we were talking about having shrimp in the Black Ghost Knifefish tank. They came out of here. Once I realized what I'd done, I pulled them out and threw them in there. But I must have missed some, because in all that time, I've not yet seen any snail eggs on the glass, and it's normally covered in snail eggs, and I usually have snails everywhere in this tank, and I just don't anymore. You see some larger ones here and there, but there's no eggs, and there's no little black speckles of baby snails everywhere like this tank used to have. So I think I need to get in there and find that last remaining shrimp or two and get them out of there. So moving on to my purple spotted gudgeon tank. Excuse me. This is the tank that I just did the low budget LED panel. I spent about $20 total on the lighting on this tank, and I'm not unhappy with it. I measured basically the little panels, and when I say panels, I'm using that term very loosely. It's literally foam board that I bought from the Wally World in the craft section. I think it's 98 cents for a piece of the stuff. But I measured the whole size of the hood. I didn't really account for the hinges or the plumbing sticking up out of the back, and so it doesn't sit on the top quite right. But again, I can take a pair of scissors and cut the pieces out that are in my way, and it'll fit down there perfectly flat. I know it's kind of hard to tell, but if you look at the profile of the tank now over the top of it, it's flat. We're talking about a piece of foam board that thick is the lighting that just lays across the top of this tank. I have one piece here, and then I have a broader piece back here, and again, it doesn't lay quite properly. It sort of lays up against the handle, and I've got the final strip of lights too close to the back. You can see all the plumbing back there. You can see the blue purple background I've got hanging back there. That doesn't need to be lit up that bright. I like the back of the tank to sort of fade into the darkness. I don't like to be able to see the plumbing back there. The dark purple background is meant to be just that sort of, you might think purple's a funny color to put at the back of a tank, but it really, in most cases, does give the sensation of just the going off into the depths of the water, into the darkness. And it tricks your brain into thinking the tank has a further, depth to it than it does. But when you light it up to the point where you can see the threads in the material, it kind of shatters the illusion a little bit. So I definitely think I would need to, rethink the way I did that. Maybe remove one or two strips of LEDs across the back. Maybe even move them further to the forward edge, because you can see the gudgeon down there is not lit up nearly as brightly as I'd like him to be, or her to be, possibly. And again, not the best quality of light. It's a little on the obnoxiously cool side, that bluish sort of side. I do have a couple of strips of warm intermingled with it, but it's not enough to blend the two lights together. If I spend a little more money, I could probably get a slightly higher quality chip, and instead of getting this really bluish, this is probably like a 6500, maybe even a 7000K. It's getting up into that kind of white, and that's a little too white to be pleasing to the eye. Maybe around a 5000K or something like that, or 4000K even, is a little more pleasing to the eye. It just starts getting tricky when you get into how well your plants are going to do under lights like that. And again, I will be talking more about lights and lighting and PAR and what your plants need and light spectrums and all that kind of stuff. We'll get a little more into the nitty-gritty about that coming up in the near future. But there's a reason for that, and we'll get to that when we get to it. So make sure you're subscribed, and you won't miss that whenever we get around to it. So moving on, we're going to look at my 125-gallon tank, and likewise, we're probably going to have to sort of piecemeal our way from one end of the tank to the other. Apanageton, I believe this is called. Apanageton, possibly. I always think the end of the world's coming whenever I look at this plant. But it's growing like mad. It's growing like crazy in there. And I believe this is new plants as opposed to what I originally thought, as it was a flower spike. One of my viewers did tell me that this is actually the way it propagates. This is a whole new plant shooting off of there, and if that's the case, then that means there's another one right below it, and I believe there's two in this top section anyway. So this thing is going to be, it's going to be a triffid is what it's going to be. Look it up if you don't know what a triffid is. So this is probably going to be one that I have for sale soon too, so don't forget, plans for sale, email below. Everything else, pretty much the same as it's always been. I haven't really gotten in here and done anything at all this week. Again, I've been sort of tinkering with other stuff, working on lights and things like that. I haven't really been doing so much, in the fish tanks proper, getting my hands wet, so to speak, as I've needed to, and I really kind of got to get back on it. Oh, I didn't even notice my Tenopoma drifting through the shadows down there. I like it when the tank is really overgrown like this and all shadowy and darkness. This just, to me, looks so natural and beautiful in there. But it's, it's just not tenable. It gets too dark for the plants. I can't really see well enough to, appreciate what's going on sometimes. The reality is I shoot a lot of video. I've got, the YouTube channel and everything, so I need a tank that can be videoed. I need a tank that we can get in there and see the fish and see what's going on in there. So I do have to keep it open enough that light gets in, but at the same time, I want it lush and green and everything else. So I did manage, as I said a while ago, I was hoping to get the water sprite back in here. When the tilapia was in here, it destroyed the water sprite. I used to have a big mass of it growing right where that Java fern in the middle is, but I didn't want to remove the Java fern. I put the Java fern there after the tilapia destroyed the water sprite. The water sprite's tender, and the Java fern is tough. And the water sprite got left alone. The Java fern got left alone. And once I got the tilapia out of here, I decided to put the water sprite back in, but I didn't want to get rid of the fern. And so now we've got this. I got this big mass of Java fern, or water sprite down at this end, and then Java fern in the middle, and then I've got the big mass of water sprite growing down at this end. And I like it. Like I said, it's just I kind of need to get in there and do something about it. It's getting a little overgrown. I also added some of this little plant. I was told it's some kind of crypt. I was told what it was by one of my viewers, and they were right when they said it. I remembered the name of it, but I cannot for the life of me remember what it was now. So I used to have several pieces of it. This little stone right here was sort of propped up against a couple pieces, and that's been knocked over, probably by my loaches. And we can see one little piece left right there. We've got a little bit grown right in here, and I also had some growing around through here. That's my phone, not yours. And this rock here was sort of propped up against there to wedge that in. And so I'm missing 3 or 4 little rootlings, right here too. I suspect they've probably been dislodged, have floated to the surface, and are up there somewhere. It's possible they got eaten. My Synodontis catfish here definitely likes eating on the plants. So it's possible they got eaten. I don't think so. They're probably still in there floating around. I'll just have to get in there and fish them out. So my 20-gallon Angelfish tank. Now my actual phone is ringing, so let me go ahead and reject this one. So my 20-gallon Angelfish tank. Nothing going on in this tank either. The angelfish have sort of grown into probably about what they're going to be full grown. They'll get slowly bigger, but they really filled in nicely. I'm really happy to see what they look like. I'm still waiting to get some male cherry barbs for this tank. It's been forever since I've seen some male cherry barbs. I got some a while ago, and they vanished out of the tank. They didn't die, they just disappeared. So I'm assuming something ate them. They were kind of small. So next time I get them, I'm going to make them stay in the quarantine until they've sort of biggened up and plumped up enough that they can get in one of the tanks without getting gobbled up. So I've got some female cherry barbs in this one, and I would like to get the males, but as I said, nothing yet. This molly here, I can never remember what this is. I always want to say it's a molly, but I'm not 100% sure. But she is awesome. That was a freebie that I got, and she's a lyre tail. It's just that she's a female, so we don't actually see the lyre tail. We only see what looks like a normal tail. But she's really a beautiful fish. Very happy with her for a freebie. And then, of course, as I've said, the angelfish in this tank are just fantastic. I absolutely love them. If I can ever get them fully in the video without glare being all over them. So, speaking of angelfish, looking down here into my quarantine tank, I'm trying my hand at another one. This one doesn't look great. I have not had very good luck with the angelfish from the big chain pet stores recently. And so I've stopped with the fancy ones and the marbled ones, and I went with this one because it really caught my eye. I do like the sort of wild type look. I know this is just a mixed breed, but it's got that sort of look of a wild caught angel. And if you'll notice, it's also got really, really shiny, sparkly scales. It looks like it's almost got some pearl scale genetics in it. It really caught my eye in the store. But again, it doesn't look really good. I did bring it home because, you know, why not? If it survives a couple of weeks, then it'll probably be okay. And if it doesn't, the big chain pet store has the guarantee. I'll just go ahead and take it back. So far so good. I don't see any ick or anything like that. But it really does just seem to kind of hover near the surface of the water and never really does much more than that. So I don't know if that's just the fish, you know, it's kind of in a stark open tank and it's just kind of doing that for safety or what. But usually when a fish just sort of hovers near the surface and doesn't really move like that, it's not a good sign, or at least that's been my experience. So we'll see, but I'm not getting my hopes up. I'm certainly not going to get attached to any of the angelfish until I've had them for a while. So, moving on, let me move my step stool out of my way behind me here. Excuse me. My 40-gallon breeder brackish tank. And 40 breeder is the size, by the way, if you're not familiar with the term 40 breeder. And I actually like it. It's a hard tank to find a hood to fit properly, but it's a great size tank. It's 3 feet side to side, 3 feet wide, and it is 18 inches deep, meaning front to back. I'm not sure how tall it is. I want to say it's 17 inches or maybe 18 inches tall as well. So it's not a really tall tank, but it does have some depth to it. So it provides you, you know, you'd be amazed at having the fish just a few more inches being able to swim away from or towards you, and the perception of depth you get of the tank. So with it being only 3 feet wide, it doesn't have a huge footprint. You can put it in a fairly small space, but it actually does give you a lot of square footage as far as area for fish to swim around in. So I like it. I think it's a great tank. If you have an area where you want to do a nice open top tank and you want to have plants growing up and out of it or whatever, a 40 breeder would be great for that. It's a big footprint. As I said, you know, you got the 18 by 36. You could have quite a bit of plants growing up and out of that and still have lots of room for fish to be swimming around in there as well. So 40 breeders are cool tanks. Again, if you want to have a hood on it though, good luck. You can probably buy the tank nice and cheap and you're going to pay 3 times for the hood what you paid for the tank. So other than that, nothing really going on. I did change the lighting on this tank. I think I mentioned that this tank also has the little piece of foam board LEDs. This tank has far fewer Then the Gudgeon tank. The Gudgeon tank, I really loaded it up. I don't know what I was thinking. I got a little carried away when I started putting them on there. On this tank, I actually have two different plugs, two different power sources, because they're really not equipped to handle much current at all. And if I put even just a couple more LEDs on this tank, they start flashing because the power supplies just aren't up to handling that much current. So I was able to finally buy a power supply that can handle plenty of current for this. And so when I started putting the Black Ghost Knifefish tank together, the Gudgeon tank, when I started putting that little LED panel together, I just kind of went nuts because I could use all the LEDs I wanted without fear of, overpowering it. And so I kind of did. I really went for it. And I just, again, we already talked about that. I kind of probably need to take one or two of those strips out of there. This tank, however, I did bare minimum, and it actually kind of works. It looks fairly nice in here. I've got two strips that are the soft white, and then the rest are the cool white. Again, there's no, these are cheap generic LEDs, so there's no indication of actual color temperature or anything. It's just cool white and warm white. And that's about what it looks like. Otherwise, nothing else I can think of. Oh, actually I can. One final thought. People have mentioned before about Butterbean having babies maybe, or me having little baby puffers in the tank or whatever. If you see those other little orange and black or yellow and black fish swimming around in the tank, those are bumblebee gobies. Those are a completely different species of fish. They're not puffers at all. They are brachygobius species, and whenever you see any little goby that is labeled as a bumblebee goby, it's just a brachygobius species. There's a lot of different little species that all look almost identical, and most scientists don't even bother to try to tell them apart. They're just bumblebee gobies. But they are a very different animal than Butterbean over here, even though the colorations are similar, and I can kind of see how you might think that those were little baby puffers, but they are not. So moving on, last, and in this case today we're going to have to say least, because there's not really anything at all going on in this tank. I have seen the crabs out once or twice over the last few days. I've thrown some vegetation in there, and they've eaten it as usual, but that's about it. I don't get to see a lot of activity. I am in the process of getting ready to move this tank. That's part of what I'm working on project-wise that I keep hinting at. So probably by the next Round the World update, you are going to see this tank in a very different position, and there will be more to the Round the World update than was in this one. As far as this one, I'm going to call it good and say thank you for joining me. We're already back to where we started. This is my 29-gallon miscellaneous. Make sure you're subscribed. That way you don't miss anything. Thanks again for watching. Look forward to my new project, as I keep mentioning. And I'll see you real soon on the next one.